Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for our virtual Mississauga Town Hall, working together for a green and just recovery, municipally, provincially, and federally. My name is Carol Azes. I'm Director of Climate Impact Fund, and I'm moderating this event along with Divya Arora from the Community Climate Council. The other organizations co-hosting this event include For Our Kids, Lead Now, and Mississauga Climate Action. And as the For Our Kids Town Hall was really the inspiration for this town hall, I'd like to turn it over to Lela to say a few words about For Our Kids. Lela?
Thanks, Carol. Really glad to be here tonight and to see so many people participating, and particularly to see the elected officials in attendance. Thank you so much for taking the time to be part of this. It's really important. It's a really important dialogue to have. So a little bit about For Our Kids in a nutshell. We're a national network, and we support parent-led, community-based groups that are involved in climate action. And one of the things that we find is common among all of these groups across the country is that they understand the importance of bringing parents' voice to decisions made at the municipal, provincial, and federal level. So that interaction with elected officials is extremely important. Parents and grandparents and anyone who's involved with the next generation knows that their stories and their voices are incredibly important. And elected officials need to hear those. So that's a little bit about what we're about. This town hall is a really good example of how those voices can be brought to the attention of federal and provincial and municipal elected officials. So I'm really glad that you're having this event tonight. I hope it's just one of many opportunities you take to engage with your elected officials. And I hope it goes very well. Thanks again for being part of it. Back to you, Carol.
Thanks, Lela. Well, we're going to have our land acknowledgement now, and I'm going to hand it over to Kathleen. Kathleen?
Thank you, Carol. We would like to acknowledge that the land we are on today is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. For thousands of years, Indigenous peoples inhabited and cared for this land. In particular, we acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe Chippewa. We also acknowledge the land that is home to the Métis, and most recently the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are grateful to live on the land that is currently known as Canada, and in so doing, pay our respects to its first inhabitants. Back to you, Carol.
Thanks, Kathleen. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce our political panelists, and we have representatives from 3 different levels of government this evening. We have Matt Mahoney, who is the councillor for Ward 8 in Mississauga and also the chair of the Environmental Action Committee. So welcome, Matt.
Thank you very much, Carol.
We also have Rudy Cazzetto, who is the Progressive Conservative MPP for Mississauga Lakeshore. So welcome, Rudy.
Thank you very much, Carol.
And last we have Sven Spengeman, who is the Liberal MP for Mississauga Lakeshore. Thanks for joining us, Sven.
Carol, thanks so much. Great to be with you.
It's really great to have all 3 of you here today. So why are we here talking about a green and just recovery? Well, as we all know, 2020 has been a year like no other. Mississaugans have been dealing with unprecedented health and economic challenges due to COVID-19. And this has disproportionately affected certain populations and communities like women, youth, poor and Indigenous and racialized communities, and many local businesses. And while the COVID crisis is devastating for many, the climate crisis will be more devastating and affect some of the same vulnerable populations if we don't take bold action now. We know that Mississauga is warming at twice the global rate. Extreme heat, flooding, poor air quality are already affecting the health of some of our citizens and will get worse as the climate warms. And we're running out of time. Scientists say we must decrease our global emissions by at least 50% in the next 10 years, to avert runaway climate change. Now, like most municipalities, Mississauga is dealing with a sizable budget shortfall due to the climate crisis, or due to the COVID crisis. And this makes it challenging to advance climate solutions. But on the positive side, we've seen communities and governments come together to take collective action to address the COVID crisis. So we believe we can harness this moment in time for a green and just recovery, meaning stimulating our economy while meeting our climate goals and achieving social justice, and not locking in more emissions or past injustices. So Canada's federal and provincial governments are putting billions of dollars into economic recovery, and how they spend that money will be critical to the kind of world our children and grandchildren will inherit. So tonight, in this town hall, we would like to explore how these funds can be directed to advance local climate solutions, improve community well-being and equity, and create jobs here in Mississauga. It's an exciting time, offering the opportunity to create a healthier, more just and resilient society. So we're looking to our government representatives here today for their creativity and innovation and leadership in their solutions. And so with that, let's get this town hall started. So in terms of the format, the town hall will be broken into two parts. So for the first part, our panelists will be responding to 5 questions that were previously sent to them. And each politician will have a maximum of 3 minutes to respond to each question. For the second part, at about 8 p.m., we'll open the floor to attendees to ask questions using the YouTube chat feature, and Divya will moderate that portion. So attendees, please find your chat box, and also remember to indicate which panelist you would like to respond to your question. So let's start with the first question. And it has to do with money. What can be done at each government level to free up funds to implement the Mississauga Climate Action Plan, advance local climate solutions, and generate local jobs? So for the first question, we're going to start with Sven. Sven?
Carol, thank you so much. And thank you to the organizers, to all of you who are dialing in tonight, and also especially to my counterparts from the municipal and provincial levels, Councillor Mahoney and MPP Cuzzetto. This is really an important conversation in the sense that we are in unprecedented times. We are in the midst of a global pandemic that's had significant ramifications across the world and continues to do so. And I'd like to think about this as really going through 3 parallel crises. The first crisis is the COVID crisis, and there are some funding streams that the federal government has opened up that very directly relate to climate mitigation and climate change. I'll talk about that in a second. The second crisis is climate. And included in climate, perhaps, if we want to acknowledge also that there's a significant crisis around biodiversity across the planet. The loss of biodiversity and species is absolutely alarming. And also a crisis around the use of single-use plastics. And perhaps we can, it's tangentially related, but it is also a hydrocarbon product in many ways, and there's an onus on the part of all of us to get on top of this crisis. And then the third one, perhaps, is the crisis of inclusion. Equity, diversity, and inclusion, going into questions of racial equality, anti-Black, anti-Indigenous racism, and I'll elaborate why that's specifically important here today, and also gender equality. So let me just start with the last point, perhaps. Today is Orange Shirt Day. Many people around the world, in Canada actually, are wearing orange shirts to acknowledge the history in Canada of residential schools, to honor the victims, to remember them, and to pledge to reconciliation. Through the residential school system, as we had built it, we have lost the Indigenous voice in large part. Through the oppression and removal of cultural heritage, we have lost an entire generation of folks that can tell us how climate change is actually impacting. We need to listen to our Indigenous leaders. And for all of us at all levels of government, I think listening is the most important part of solving these questions at the local level. As you said, Carol, the federal government has made significant investments to the tune of $63 billion under this government for green infrastructure and a clean economy. No other government in Canada's history has done that. But unless we listen carefully through advocacy like your own and that of our Indigenous leaders, we are not going to be able to provide the solutions that are concrete enough to actually make a difference. We have just opened up under COVID a new program. It's called the COVID Resilience Stream that's making available $3 billion in existing funding for things like retrofits, like repairs and upgrades to municipal, residential, territorial, Indigenous buildings, to look at active transportation, including parks, trails, footbridges, bike lanes, and also disaster mitigation and adaptation projects. That's just one stream. There are many others. There's the Green Municipal Fund, which has opened up an additional $950 million for very close cooperation between the federal government and provinces. And before I'm out of time, in about 20 seconds, I want to just highlight and maybe talk about it later, the Climate Action and Awareness Fund, which is a new fund for $206 million to do things like what you're doing tonight, to invite advocacy to come forward and to tell us where the gaps are and how we fix them. And I think that's my time. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Sven. We're going to turn it over to Rudy now. Rudy?
Thank you very much for holding this meeting this evening. It's an honor to be here. As a lifetime resident of Port Credit, the environment is very important to me. As my father worked at a refinery here in Port Credit, that he died of asbestosis really means that we have to get off fossil fuels in time. And I want to thank all three levels of government for working together on the crisis that we have in Canada. Without all three of us working together, we'd never be able to solve anything with the environment or anything that goes on in our country. As well, that the Ontario estimated that Ontario Job Recovery Committee, we're composed of ministers and from across the government to develop a recovery plan for the goals in the future here, as well as investing in new products like ideas of emission reduction. I'll use an example that just happened the other day, and the federal government was there too at Ford Motor Company, where I worked for 31 years. Ford used to, well, they're still making a combustion engine, but in 2023, they're going to go over to an electric vehicle built right here in Canada with 5 different platforms coming out of the Oakville assembly plant. Electric vehicles are the future, that we know. The only problem is that right now, the nickel, that Ontario has 20% of the nickel and Quebec has lithium. These batteries are not being built in Canada, and they're being exported. The raw materials are being exported out of Canada, and they're excavating more raw materials like nickel and lithium in other countries, and they're doing a lot of environmental damage while they're doing that. So if we can produce these products here, like the battery in Ontario and Quebec, like with a plant on the border of Quebec and Ontario, because they have the lithium, we have the nickel, and we produce the batteries here, it will reduce the carbon footprint as well. So these are things that we have to do with all 3 levels of government and work together to do this much better, because right now we're not doing the job that we should be doing. We should do a much better job. As growing up in Port Credit, I remember going shopping with my mother at Law Boss, which was the no frills. And as a young kid, there used to be paper bags. And at that time, we got rid of paper bags because they said that we were cutting down too many trees, and we went over to plastic. And now we want to get off plastic because that's hurting us. So we have to be careful when we do things, because sometimes we think we're doing the right thing, but we're not. So we have to be very careful and really think it out before we do approach different changes that we want for our environment, to improve our environment over the next 10, 20, 30 years and for our future generations. Thank you.
Thanks, Rudy. That's a good point. There can be unintended consequences. So we're going to turn it over to Matt now to talk about where we can find funds to advance local climate solutions.
Thank you, Carol, and also I'd like to thank you and the team for putting this together. It's always important to have the discussion, and that's really what this is, and to get input from people. I think as politicians, our main job is to listen to people to find solutions. So it's a very interesting and great question. Discussing how finding or what we're going to do when funds become available, and I appreciate my colleagues from the other levels of government, because I'm sure everybody can appreciate our revenue tax tax revenue comes from property tax. So we're very limited. So we really rely on the partnerships and the great work between the provincial and federal government to to help us achieve some of these grand plans that we have, and we do appreciate the work that they've done. But the city is pursuing multiple funding opportunities to advance the installation of EV charging stations, for one. An example, we just received $60,000 from Natural Resource Canada to install public EV charging stations in 2 locations in Mississauga. It's a great example of the partnership there with the federal government. We also have a number of other active funding applications to the federal government. The Atmospheric Fund, it's always a mouthful for me, and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, FCM, to help support our climate action in Mississauga. There's a number of actions that the city is already taking as well that don't need direct funding or additional funding, but create the future decision-making of our climate action. And a good example of this is the establishment of the Green Fleet and Equipment Policy. So it's a corporate policy to meet the goal of prioritizing the conversion of our fleet and all of our equipment to low or zero emission technologies. There's other examples out there, some of our outreach with educational efforts for residents, but also for our youth, to make sure that we engage in them and continue to move forward and getting their input. So one of the, the great privileges that I have at the City of Mississauga is chairing the Environment Action Committee. And we have a number of youth members there that really provide, input as to, what they're dealing with and some of the ideas that they have and bring forward. And, another example is we talk about the plastics and elimination. So from us, a local municipal level, we have a lot of community centers and arenas and those types of things. So we're working towards, banning those plastics as our contracts expire with the vendors and those types of things. So those are, initiatives that kind of come through EAC, through the Environment Action Committee, and through our youth on how we can do this. There's always challenges, but we need to all work together to ensure that we can do that. So funding is extremely important. We rely on our partners at both the provincial and federal level. But as a municipality, there's some of that, we call it low-hanging fruit, that we're working towards, achieving, that can, might seem like a small difference, but really at the end of the day, it makes a massive difference on the environment. So thank you.
Oh, that was great timing. Thank you, Matt. We'll move on to question 2, which is focused on building emissions. So 52% of Mississauga emissions come from buildings. Deep energy retrofits present a great opportunity to increase local jobs while reducing carbon emissions. What will be done, and by when, to promote deep energy retrofits and create jobs? Again, we're going to start with Sven. Sven?
Carol, thanks very much. And it's a super important question. With respect to energy use, buildings account for about 17% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. And some of you might remember that a decade or 2 ago, Bill Clinton took on this project of arguing that home and office retrofits are going to be the source of economic growth across North America in the days and years to come. And he was a bit early in that thinking, but it is now really gaining traction. We have invested through ENACAN, through the Building and Retrofits program, $1 billion just last year with respect to ensuring that there are energy efficient measures, both in new buildings and in retrofits. And ultimately, the aspiration is to move towards net zero building codes, right? So that from a regulatory perspective, new buildings are built in such a way that they're energy efficient, but the real growth, the real job growth, and this is where it connects to COVID and recovering green and rebuilding better, lies in those construction and engineering and maintenance jobs that would be facilitated and generated through these investments to get people back to work. And I want to circle back to a comment that I made early on with respect to diversity and inclusion. There is a gender component here. Many of the jobs in energy and home retrofits are engineering jobs. Our construction jobs are jobs that are traditionally in male-led work fields. And it's incredibly important that we open those jobs up to women to make sure, I think as the title of tonight's discussion reflects, that we're actually engaging in a just recovery, not just a green recovery, but in a recovery where people can participate no matter who they are in the job opportunities that'll be generated. In addition, the federal government's invested $200 million in a emerging renewable power program. People say that the first energy source is energy that is saved. And then we talk about wind, solar, electrical, nuclear. I think we should open up a discussion on nuclear because it's a very important component of the mix at the moment as well, a transitional energy source. But saving energy, as the question alludes to, is absolutely fundamental. And then through the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, there's an additional $2 billion across Ontario specifically that will be invested in green infrastructure. And that includes funding for climate mitigation, capacity to manage more renewable energy, to improve access to clean energy transportation, more efficient buildings, and improve production of clean energy. So retrofits, yes, incredibly important. There are also savings, energy savings to be made in the sectors of transportation. Electrifying GO Transit, for example, gives us a huge opportunity to be cleaner, to be faster, to be quieter, to be able to put more trains on the rails, take more people out of cars. Of course, there is a COVID component. Now that we're in a second wave, public transit potentially is a vector that we need to pay attention to not cram people into buses and trains when there's risk of infection. But for the future, green transportation is absolutely part of the mix.
Thanks, Ben. We'll turn to Rudy now to discuss what will be done and when to promote deep energy retrofits and create jobs.
Okay, well, Ontario is currently leading in the jurisdiction in Canada when it comes to energy efficient standards in the building code. Today, Ontario building code ensures new homes built after 2018 use 50% less energy to heat and cool their homes. Building before 2005 results in much lower carbon footprint than the older homes. Now, if you noticed in newer homes and in retrofitting as well, when we go if you go over to the new furnaces, there are 2-stage furnaces with the motor switching on and off, so you don't have the fan working at one speed consuming more electricity, just as 4-stage pool motors that we're having now installed into our homes that people that do have pools. So you have a pump working at 4 different levels, so it reduces the carbon footprint in electricity, as well as your air conditioner as well in the new. So those are what we're looking at retrofitting in the newer homes and into your older homes as well. Over the last 15 years, I've noticed too in homes that we've improved on their insulation and our window qualities too in the new build homes. And if you looked at Lakeview Partners down there in Lakeview, when they're going to be building their new subdivision there will be a lot of new efficient energy saving products put into these new homes that are being built in our own Lakeview community as the vacuum waste management system, that there won't be even garbage trucks going through the neighborhood. They'd be sucking it through a vacuum into a waste area. So these are all things that we are looking at as well as a government. And I know that they're years away, some of them, but they are going to be happening as soon as we can as well. And with COVID-19, a lot of things have changed around the world and here in Mississauga, even on, like we have to look at, we are building an LRT going up here, Ontario, in the near future. Will it be used to the capacity that it should be? Because now people are worried about getting on transit because of COVID. So these are things that we have to look at as well, moving on to the future, because we have to build for the future, but we have to be careful of how we build it as well, like I was mentioning earlier on as well.
Thanks, Rudy. So we'll turn to Matt, and so the question again is, what will be done and by when to promote deep energy retrofits and create jobs? And just as an add-on, I know that the Mississauga Climate Action Plan really promoted air source heat pumps. So I don't know if you can say anything about those.
Well, it's one thing that we're definitely exploring, and there are a number of other initiatives that we are doing. But I think one of the issues on this, or one of the questions here, is how are we actively pursuing funding? Because I think it does come down to funding on all of these, different initiatives, and we as a city would like to do a lot. And as I said previously, I know that our partners at the federal level and provincial level are going to work with us. And the city right now is actively pursuing funding opportunities, and we'll be developing a solid business case for district energy in the downtown in 2021. And we're currently updating our official plan, which will include explicit direction on climate change action. So it's really a moving target, and again, working together in collaboration with groups and looking for the opportunities for funding is something that we as a city are actively pursuing on a regular basis. In addition, with the Toronto Region Conservation Authority, the TRCA, which I had the privilege of serving on for 4 years, we've established a Sustainable Neighborhood Action Program. They call it SNAP. And it's in the Burnhamthorpe area in Mississauga, which the councillor that represents that area is Chris Fonseca, and she's very, very proud of this initiative. And in partnership with the city of Mississauga and others, TRCA is currently working on a tower demonstration project at 3 towers in Burnhamthorpe, in the Burnhamthorpe SNAP. And the goal is to make the towers more sustainable, resilient, energy efficient, and livable. For example, there's also plans to build a community garden at one of the towers in the fall this year, which again may seem like a small thing, but it's really not. You know, a community garden not only is good for the environment and those initiatives, but it's also good to bring community together and be able to make a difference in any way you can. But to the climate change action plan, there's obviously a big ticket, a money ticket there. And again, when we speak of COVID, we're all challenged, somewhat financially as government, because I think we've all kind of gone all in to ensure that the residents and people in Mississauga and the province and the country, giving them kind of ensuring that they have the resources they need to continue to get through on these. And in that same fashion, we as a city are very thankful for the federal government and provincial government to come and help us. Because again, going back to my first point on our revenue stream, it really comes from property tax, and we're limited on how we can do that. So as you said in your point, but district energy, as Rudy has mentioned too, with Lakeview, it's a great project going on. District energy is being looked at down there as well. And the councillor down there, Stephen Dasco, and I know Rudy's been heavily involved in that as well as Sven for a number of years in doing that. And I think that particular development will be an example for the world as what we can do together to make an absolutely environmentally friendly community, walkable, livable, environmentally friendly. It is going to be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. So our next question revolves around transportation, and we've already hit on this a little bit, but 30% of Mississauga's carbon footprint is from the transportation sector. And so to reduce these emissions, we need to increase cycling, walking, transit use, and electric vehicles, which will also improve air quality and community health. How will you encourage and fund more low carbon transportation options or incentivize working from home after the COVID crisis? So for that, we're going to start with Rudy. Rudy.
Thank you very much for that question. On electric vehicles, we'll start off with electric vehicles. Under Ontario's green program, that we're going to continue with the HOV lanes for green vehicles, as well as the high occupancy tolls lane on the Queen Elizabeth, as well as more MTO-owned carpooling lots. That would help us. This way, we'd all pool together and go on with one vehicle, as well as the LRT going up here, Ontario, and we are looking at the BRT, the bus rapid transit down Lakeshore as well as the two communities down here. They're looking at their own shuttle transportation to the GO train station, so that will improve getting vehicles off the road and congestion on our roads that we're having right now as well. We're not having the congestion today because of COVID, but we know that once we do go back to our normal routine, which we hope we will in the near future, there will be congestion. So we have to look at that in the future, as well as electrifying the GO train tracks so that we can move quicker to downtown Toronto, which that's what a lot of people would want. Otherwise, you won't get them out of the vehicle. If you have to wait hours and hours to get to work or come back home, you're not going to take it. And that's what we have to work out at all three levels of government, working together to get this moving. I know that I've been working very closely with Caroline Mulrooney and Minister Surma to get more transit down to the Mississauga Lakeshore area. And I've spoken to Sven about that too, that we need transit down here as well. And I've spoken to Steve Dasco and Karen Raz as well. I know that that is our future, because if we build this community like we are building this community down here with all these vehicles, we won't be moving anywhere. So we need to invest in as much as we can into transit, public transit. But now we have a worry to it, like what we were speaking before about is COVID-19. How many people will be taking this public transit? So we have to look at everything as we move forward in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Rudy. I'm going to turn to Matt now. Matt? Matt, you're on mute.
How did that happen? I didn't do that. Anyway, I was just saying that, you know, COVID definitely has thrown a bit of a curveball to all of us on all kinds of issues here, which, but the active transportation one is, you know, is extremely important. And the COVID-19 recovery framework, which we approved as a city council in July, it says we'll be adding, or what we approved was adding 17.9 kilometers of new on-road bicycle lanes and separated bicycle lanes in locations across the city. And this is really to, you know, to rapidly improve the active transportation network in 2020. So this represents a 30% increase in the amount of on-road bicycle lanes in the city, which I think is pretty significant. And it is always a challenge to do it, but you know, we are moving forward. And the city's cycling master plan is our guiding document in improving the cycling network in the city. So we approved that in 2018, and the plan calls for a full build out of the cycling network within the next 25 years. I know 25 years seems like a long time, but you know, there's a lot that goes into it and a lot of planning. And the city is currently working on a pedestrian master plan as well, which will also provide some guidance for sidewalks and other pedestrian networks priorities. In my ward, in Ward 8, we've been studying improvement cycling along the College Way, and project updates for that will be coming. But essentially, you know, we talked about doing a road diet along the College Way. We got public input on that. There's always some challenges with that. So we're now doing an in-boulevard separated bike lane, you know, along the College Way, which is really one of the first. And a lot of public consultation goes into that. So we've been moving forward with that. The Green Fleet and Equipment Policy, which the city's developing a corporate policy to meet, you know, goal of prioritizing our conversion, as I mentioned previously, of our fleet to low and zero emission technologies. And finally, which I also touched on before, the EV infrastructure installations. And thank you, Sven, for the $60,000 to get that ball rolling. And we're actively pursuing more installations of EV charging installations for both public use as well as use by the city and the corporate fleet. So those are some of the initiatives, and we hope that the installations will be completed in a couple locations within the next 12, let's say 18 months, and more information will be coming forward on that. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Matt. We'll turn to Sven now.
Carol, thanks so much. And also thanks to Rudy and to Matt. I think our audience by now will see that, you know, the three levels of government are very much on the same side of the page. This is not about arguing about the science of climate change. It's about accepting that we are facing a challenge and really sort of getting aligned on finding solutions. And this evening's exercise, the advocacy, the ground level views are absolutely critical. It's tough to do things from a bubble in Ottawa. So the more I hear from you through your organizations and through your viewers, what works and what doesn't work and what good ideas there are, the better the three of us can get to work across all levels of government. Look, transportation is crucial. And I think about 30% of Mississauga's carbon footprint, as the question says, is from the transportation sector. I don't know if that includes commercial aviation. I would think it probably doesn't. But obviously there's a discussion around the carbon footprint of commercial travel by aircraft that we could talk about. Most importantly, I think it's also about rebuilding justly, making sure that our seniors, that our persons with disability, that our youth have a safe and effective and green way to move. And much of the discussion takes place about the sort of, they call it the last mile or the last kilometer from the public bus stop back to the home, particularly in February when it's nighttime and there's a blizzard. Right, we're geographically challenged in that way because of seasonalities, and there are some models that work. There are other models that are having to be rethought that way. With respect to electric vehicles, I think it's crucial that we rebuild quickly a network of charging stations. COVID-19 has shrunk our radius in terms of interaction, so most of us who have an electric vehicle can keep it in the garage, charge up, and get very easily to where we need to go to get groceries or to the doctor or to the workplace and back on a charge. Driving from Windsor to Toronto or from Toronto Toronto to Montreal by electric vehicle is not as easy yet. So the government of Canada, through the mandate letter of Minister Regan, our Minister of Natural Resources, has been directing the creation or installation of 5,000 charging stations across the Trans-Canada Highway and also in Canada's urban and rural areas. We've committed $8 million this year to help build 160 fast level 3 charging stations. Right now in Mississauga, in the Mississauga area, we have about 243 stations with 1,139 outlets. So we're getting somewhere. We need to complete that grid to make sure that people have the incentive to invest in an electric vehicle. We're doing that by creating incentive structures for manufacturers to work in Canada. So folks that are working on zero emissions products are going to enjoy a corporate tax rate of half what other companies would enjoy. That will bring in the investment. We've invested over $7 billion through the Investing in Canada infrastructure program, with Mississauga getting $300 million of that with respect to transportation, public transit, and electric buses. There's a lot of work to be done, but once again, the success depends on the ground level advocacy with respect to ridership, with respect to inclusion, and making sure that we can get from that last bus stop back to our door. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sven. Those are some great initiatives. I'm really pleased to hear those. I just wanted to remind our attendees, our viewers, that if you do have a question, you can go ahead and put it in the chat box. You can put it in early and make sure you indicate who you would like to answer it. And we're compiling them during this first half hour here. So we're going to move on to question number 4. Which has to do with climate impacts in vulnerable populations. So we know that Canada is warming at twice the global average, and by 2050, it's expected that there will be much more extreme heat and more basement flooding due to intense precipitation. And the elderly, very young, and poor are more vulnerable to extreme heat. And low and middle income citizens can suffer quite significantly during flooding events. So what policies will be put in place to protect these populations? I'd like to start with Sven this time. Sven.
Sure, Carol, thanks very much. And this is the big picture question, right? It's about global warming. It's about climate, not global warming, but climate change. But the fact that we are in Canada warming at twice the global average, other areas are not, we are disproportionately affected. What that means is a greater risk of wildfires, a greater risk of erratic flooding, intense flooding of the kind that we've seen in recent years. And it's important to talk about mitigation. It's also very important to make sure that we get to net zero nationally, as we've committed to federally by 2050, that we meet our Paris targets by 2030 and hopefully exceed them. And it's also the search for natural solutions. So we're committed as the federal government to the planting of 2 billion trees. I know Mississauga is underway with a very progressive strategy that will feed into that. Natural solutions are critical. And like I said in the beginning, listening to our Indigenous voices, our Indigenous leaders, especially those in the far north that are on the forefront of these developments, is absolutely critical. From our perspective, it's about adaptation in large part as well, which means to make sure that we don't get devastated by the floods that we saw here locally a couple of years ago, and people having their basement flooded and having to be ripped out, that we mitigate against fires of the kinds that we've seen in Fort McMurray and elsewhere in the country in BC. And to make sure that, things like even basic things here locally, like increased levels of mold because of the heat that we're experiencing, questions around air conditioning for seniors, that we get on top of that and look for local solutions. So the government federal government has launched a disaster mitigation and adaptation fund in the order of magnitude of $2 billion to support large scale infrastructure projects to help communities like Mississauga better manage these risks. And Matt will be able to elaborate, but also important for us to hear from our residents what those investments should be and how they can actually have the greatest impact. The one thing that I wanted to bring in here in the last minute that I talked about it earlier, is the Climate Action and Awareness Fund. So when we're talking about the big picture and the fact that Canada is heating at a greater rate, The federal government has invested $206 million under Minister Wilkinson, the Minister for Environment and Climate Change, to launch advocacy efforts. More advocacy, more specific advocacy. Smart political leaders will invest in their own advocates and will listen to them. It's the kind of thing that you're doing here tonight. So this awareness fund has 4 key areas. It's to create youth awareness, engagement, and action. And many of us know how engaged our youth already are. Community-based climate action projects, advancing climate science and technology, and supporting academia and think tank organizations to better understand and support our transition to net zero, which is a fundamental component of the actual fight against climate change. I put that to you as a fund that is available to you and your stakeholders and members to potentially explore with respect to projects that we could launch here in Mississauga to sharpen our advocacy and to make sure that we stay on track.
Thanks, Ben. We definitely need as much advocacy as we can get. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt now to talk about how to mitigate climate impacts.
Thank you very much. It's said all the time that the 100-year storm is now every 5 years, and I think that's something that we've seen. Whether it was the flooding that we had. Again, most of it down in the south in Mississauga a number of years ago. Also ice storms, things along those lines that really kind of catch us off guard, so to speak. And we do have some contingency flooding emergency funding to be able to help offset some of that. But these issues are happening more than any of us expected, and happening rapidly. And this is something that we need to put top of mind. So we continue to work closely as far as the vulnerable folks out there with our Peel Public Health, which is really a great organization, and I can't thank them enough, especially during this COVID time. The amount of work that they've been putting in day and night, 24/7. And we also work closely with the conservation authorities, to monitor the public health vulnerability to climate change throughout the whole region, not just in Mississauga, and particularly as it relates to the extreme heat and flooding, as we've seen more and more often. So working with our partners at the region is extremely important, and I can't say enough about the great work that they do and the great support that they provide to the residents of Mississauga, Brampton, and Caledon. And we as a city of Mississauga continue to work on a variety of initiatives to mitigate the impacts of extreme heat, and this includes, as I think Sven had mentioned, increasing our tree canopy. One of the real devastating things that happened not only in Mississauga but across really Ontario is the emerald ash borer, which took out so many of our trees, and there was no way that we could save them. So here we are, having to chop down and cut so many trees across the city and really destroying our tree canopy. So we as a city were proactive and took on the 1 million tree campaign. So we get community groups involved, and our forestry staff, our wonderful team, and all my colleagues on council as well get involved. To date, we've planted over 400,000 trees, and well on our way to achieve the goal of 1 million by 2032. So, but this is another example of bringing communities together. We work with ratepayer groups. We have planting days. We do all of these things, and our staff come out with all the caliper trees and all of the equipment to bring people together. It raises awareness and continues the discussion on the challenges we have with climate change, with losing our tree canopy, but it also brings community together, which, from my standpoint, is extremely important as well to help fight this challenge. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Glad to hear there's so many trees being planted. We'll turn it over to Rudy now.
Thank you very much. And as soon as we came into power here in Ontario, we had our own Made in Ontario environment plan to address climate change and to help prepare the communities and protect the environment. And like you were mentioning earlier on, I heard from Sven there about our Indigenous community. What we're doing for them right now is we're going to start building SMRs. Those are small nuclear reactors for electricity in their areas, instead of using oil that they've been using and polluting the air. And it's not as healthy, because a lot of people are worried about nuclear in this province and across Canada, but nuclear is probably one of the safest ways to produce energy, and it's clean, right? And hydroelectric as well. And I want to go back to when we had our power plant here in Mississauga, and I'm proud of our former minister at the time, Elizabeth Whitmore. She was the one that got rid of the plant. It was scheduled on March 27, 2001. And I'm really proud of what the PC government had done at that time to get rid of coal plants. And there's an issue right now that we're losing jobs in Ontario because of our hydro rates were so high when we took office 2 years ago. Like we lost Procter & Gamble to West Virginia, and that was 480 manufacturing jobs that we lost here. And the problem is that we're losing jobs to the US, to places like West Virginia, that 95% of their energy is produced by coal. So these are things that we have to look at when we do improve on our efficiencies and get away from coal here in the province of Ontario and from natural gas, or sorry, from the combustion engine as well, because we're sending our jobs to another state in the US where they're using coal. Now, there's no wall between the US and Canada that the environment is protected. This smoke is coming over here and it's affecting our communities as well. So we have to be very strategic, like I said before, when we do things in the province here of Ontario, because we have to work together at all three levels of government and think this out before we do things. Because if we're shipping our jobs to the US where they're using coal in those states, we're not doing anything correct here. So we have to produce the jobs here, keep the jobs here, and do it at a gradual rate so we do not send them to states like West Virginia where they're using coal at 95%. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rudy. We'll go to the last question, which revolves around targets and emission targets and accountability. So the Mississauga Climate Action Plan included a target of 80% greenhouse gas emission reductions by 2050. And Mayor Crombie was in favor of achieving net zero by 2050. What will you do at your level of government to set aggressive interim targets and make sure those targets are met? We'll start with you, Matt.
Great, thank you, Carol. And I think it's, it's important. And Mayor Crombie wasn't the only one. I mean, there's a lot of us on council who obviously would love to, achieve net zero by 2050. We kind of looked at it as having an achievable goal that we thought, we could do and was reasonable. We certainly are doing everything we possibly can to reduce that. And as far as, interim targets, we've set a greenhouse gas reduction target of 40% by 2030. But at the end of the day, we all have to work together to try to move the yardstick as fast as we can, and working together to reduce the greenhouse gases, as quick as possible. So, I mean, I think being realistic was something that we looked at, and we need to, work with everybody to achieve those goals. We did declare a climate emergency when we were doing all of these, and it was really one of a great story, and we get it all the time at council. We had a kids from Camilla grade school come in, and they did a great, wonderful presentation to council, and they made the pitch for net zero by 2050 and climate emergency and all of these things, and that to me speaks to really what is important is our youth. I have kids myself. If I was ever to put the wrong thing in the wrong bin, I would, my daughter would not be very happy with me. But having the kids, be involved in this and really drive this is extremely important. So in the short term, I think that the reduction of 40% by 2030 is something that I think we can achieve, and we need to do it. But we don't want to set goals that are unachievable for us, and that's not to say that we can't achieve net zero by 2050. But we want to have targets and move forward. But one thing I can say on behalf of my council, on behalf of the committee that I chair, we're all committed to this. And I know that the other levels, and Sven and Rudy and their colleagues are also committed to this, and we talk about it regularly. So, just giving you a number of reduction of target of 40% by 2030 is really the answer to the question. But at the end of the day, we need to pull together to see if we to achieve those targets and achieve more. So, and like you said, Mayor Crombie was in favor of it, but she wasn't the only one, but she's the mayor and she's leading the ship there. So, good for her. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I was in council chambers for that, so it stuck with me. We'll turn it over to Rudy. If you can comment on what you will do at your level of government to set aggressive interim climate targets and make sure those targets are met.
Well, the environment plan commits to a 30% reduction below 205 levels by 2030. Ontario has already played an important role in fighting climate change, and it has already shown strong leadership by taking steps in significantly reducing greenhouse gases. Since 2005, almost all of Canada's progress towards the 2030 Paris Accord targets are being driven by Ontario. So we are way ahead of the rest of the country to hit our targets for the Paris Accord. As well as, like Matt was saying, it's about education too. Like, we have to educate our children. It's very important because, like, my children, we have the recycle box, we have the green bin, we have the regular garbage, and sometimes they do, throw things in the wrong one. Now, I don't know if they do it intentionally but we have to keep educating them and say, the banana peel has to keep going in the biodegradable, and the cardboard's got to go in the blue bin. But we got to keep doing that, and I think the whole community has to keep doing that. I think that's very important. So it all comes down to education in our schools and between all three levels of government to educate our children, because sometimes if we educate them, they will be able to achieve the goals that we want in this country. And I think that would be the most important thing, is educating our children and ourselves too, because sometimes they tell us what to do more than we tell them. So, and that means that they're learning, they're ahead of us. So I'm really happy to hear that our kids are ahead of us. But that's what I think that we should do more, is educate our children through, city programs, our schools, and, anywhere that we can educate our children more to do better for our environment.
Thanks, Rudy. I really agree with you. We need more climate education for everyone. I'm going to pass it on to Sven now for his comments.
Thanks, Carol. And let me just start by very strongly echoing both Matt and Rudy. We're all listening very carefully to our community, and without advocacy and awareness, nothing would happen. In fact, from my end, it was Ms. Foster's grade 5 class at Canoli Public School a couple of years ago that wrote to me saying, "Can't you please ban plastic bags?" And that initial advocacy effort led to a town hall that was attended by 400 people in our community, with subsequent connections to the Minister for Environment and Climate Change and the International Organization for Ocean that is cleaning up our oceans, right? So it does matter what our youth says, and youth are leaders, not of tomorrow, but of today. And we only have one planet. There is no planet B, there is no Earth 2.0. We have to get this right. And when it comes to net zero, one of the things we've now committed to is a legislative backstop of net zero by 2050. That'll do a number of things. It'll get the public engaged in achieving it. It'll create targets. Very importantly, it also provides predictability to the private sector to say, okay, Canada is going net zero by 2050. They've legislatively committed to it. It's safe and it's strategic and it's wise for us to invest in Canada. Right. So to bring in that foreign investment, we need that legislative certainty. We're committed to the Paris targets, as I've said, in 2030, if not sooner. We need to listen to our experts on the pathways to get there. We need to use nature-based solutions like planting of trees. Phasing out coal is crucial, as Rudy has alluded to. Nuclear is a very important discussion. It's a very relevant discussion for our riding because we have a good proportion of the nuclear technology supply chain here in Mississauga Lakeshore on the West End. These are high-paying jobs. These are engineering jobs in large part, and science and technology jobs. There is a discussion around nuclear, and Rudy is very right to say that the way we're doing it now, it's a safe way. It is a transitional energy source, but it's long-term transition, and it is clean. So it'd be great to get some views. I don't know if there's any questions waiting or views or comments from our audience tonight on nuclear energy. But very importantly, also, it is about protecting lands and oceans. So our Prime Minister just this week went to the UN and has said that he would like to protect, that we're committing to protect 30% of land and oceans by 2030. We're the only country in the top 10 largest countries to have made that pledge, and he's looking for similar commitments from the other 9 countries to make sure that we get into a better space to prevent deforestation, to prevent the misuse of land that'll then trigger more GHGs. We will work closely with our Indigenous peoples on these questions. It is an opportunity, as I've said earlier, for reconciliation. And then also being on the Great Lakes, we've got 26% of the world's fresh water on our doorsteps, with 40 million people having direct access to it. That's a huge asymmetry. So the resource of water, in addition to greenhouse gas reductions, is a very, very important question in terms of keeping the planet healthy and the future green.
Thanks for your comments, Sven. So this concludes the first portion of the town hall, and we're going to move into the Q&A portion. And I'm going to turn it over to Divya to moderate that portion. Divya.
All right, thank you, Carol. And thank you to our elected officials as well for all your thoughtful responses so far to the prepared questions. I'd just like to reiterate what Carol mentioned earlier. We will be taking questions from the audience through the YouTube chat now. So for all of those who are watching, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask our elected officials, please send them in the YouTube chat now and specify which politician you would like to address your question. And to the speakers, please note that you will have 2 minutes to answer each question. I will read out the question and then direct it to the respective speaker to answer. So our first question is for Rudy. And the question asks, will the province restore the provincial electric vehicle incentive program that was canceled by the Ford government?
At this present time, no, we're not. And I'll tell you why. I disagree with that program too. First of all, the percentage of vehicles that are electric that are built in Ontario or in Canada are up to now was only 1. The rest are built offshore or in the US. So you're giving money, and you're giving money to another company that's offshore. It's not produced this vehicle here. Now that Ford will be producing electrical vehicles here, that might change. But up to now, you were getting a reduction on a car up to whatever. If you were buying an expensive Tesla or even a BMW that's electric that's over $100,000, you were getting a tax credit. So why should you get a tax credit for a vehicle that is over $100,000? Now, if a vehicle is much cheaper, I could agree with that. But if the vehicle is not built in Ontario or in Canada, we're not keeping the money here. So I recommend that we first start building vehicles, electric vehicles here in Canada or in Ontario, and then we can start looking at giving back to the people that are purchasing the vehicles here that are produced here.
All right, thank you for your answer, Rudy. So I'll move on to the next question, which is for Matt. And the question asks, how do you ensure that the city's first ever cycle tracks on the full length of the College Way get built, connecting seniors, students, malls, jobs, and UTM to one another? You're on mute, I think.
Do I mute that myself, or does somebody mute me? Because I haven't touched it. But anyway, thank you for the question. And I'd like to thank Raul for the question. I know he's been quite active on this particular file. So we've been working very hard to, to get this done. And one of the most important things, and I'm sure my colleagues will agree, whenever we do anything, is community consultation. So we need to go out to the community and ensure that, that everybody understands the issue, that everybody kind of agrees and work to it. A lot of times the residents don't always agree with what we're doing, but we need to communicate. So in this particular situation, the proposal was to do a road diet. So essentially take a lane away on College Way from Winston Churchill down to Mississauga Road in each direction, which would essentially limit it to 2 lanes. So we took it out to the public, had a number of public meetings, and there were some concerns from the residents, on that. So I'm always a person to say, well, let's find a solution. Let's work together on a solution. If this one isn't going to work, what is going to work? So in working with staff, we determined that there is ample room to be able to put a dedicated bike lane in the boulevard. So to put an in-boulevard bike lane, which essentially would work together. So everybody would work together. We wouldn't have to eliminate the lanes. We could have the bike lanes on either side. We also have a pedestrian sidewalk on the other side of it. So it's a lane for bikes. We don't limit the cars. One of the challenges that I have in the west end of Mississauga is we're not Amsterdam, we're not Toronto. We're not a dense part. So a lot of people rely on their vehicles. One of the challenges we also have is transit. We've got the 36 and a couple of buses. We don't have a great transit system in the West End. So it's a matter of finding a balance. So I'm quite pleased that, we are moving towards the in-boulevard bike lane. And if I had more time, I'd be more happy to talk about the UTM and some of the challenges there with illegal basement apartments and these kids that are essentially put in danger because of some of these challenges that we have. So I'm always happy to chat with Raul one-on-one about this, not through Twitter, but one-on-one, because that for me is the most effective way, and I'm always easy to get a hold of. So please reach out, Raul. Happy to chat more. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And so for the next question, it's for Sven. And the question asks, can we create other centers of excellence for other green technologies, like the $500 million for the Ford plant to build electric vehicles?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's no conceptual reason why Canada couldn't be at the very forefront of innovation, science, technology with respect to the green economy. And in many ways, we are putting those investments into place right now through the work that Minister Baines is doing through innovation, science, and economic development, but also some of the structural funds that I've mentioned in the formal Q&A, making those commitments now with respect to finding upstream solutions in renewables, transitioning a very hydrocarbon centric, to be blunt, and it's no secret, a very hydrocarbon centric economy onto the green track requires legislative backstops. Like I said, the commitment to go net zero by 2050 and actually putting that into legislation rather than just making a political commitment to it. Let's make a legal commitment to it. And then working through our colleges, universities, think tanks, being inclusive in our views, being inclusive of Indigenous views on science and technology, on gender views with respect to science and technology, making sure that we take women in STEM seriously and create STEM jobs for everybody who's interested. That really is the ramping up of the green economy that we're talking about right now. And COVID in so many ways is pushing us very firmly in that direction, because it's not only the fact that we are facing the climate crisis, we are also very urgently looking for new ways to transition back into economic growth and prosperity. And we can't backslide. It can't be augmenting and increasing the hydrocarbon economy. It needs to be taking stock of the role that hydrocarbon resources still play in the short term, but then very progressively creating those job opportunities that create the multipliers. So yes, it starts with R&D, but ultimately, like we discussed earlier, it also goes into the question of construction jobs and making sure that, for every green construction job, there is a multiplier into other feeder industries so that we can get back onto much more solid economic footing. That's absolutely the right question to ask. And I think the door is open in many ways for the federal government to lead that with the kind of input that we're getting from this question tonight.
Great, thank you for your response. So the next question is for all the speakers. So I'll direct it to Matt first. And if at any point you'd like me to repeat the question, please just let me know. So the question asks, what advice or insights would you like to share with youth who are wanting to make an impact, whether that is at the regional level in regards to climate and or by getting into politics? So I'll start with Matt.
Community and civic engagement. So for those of you who don't know, I was raised in a political family. I've been around politics since for my whole life, and one of the things that I encourage all kids to do, and I know that Rudy and Sven and I often go to schools and speak to kids, tell them to get involved. It's very important. There's so many good things that that the youth can bring, and so many good initiatives, but just getting involved in your community and really making a difference, because a little bit can make a big difference. And there's so many opportunities out there for the youth to get involved in the community and to give your time, to do it. I know that, a lot of the high school kids, I've had some that need their community hours and they come, I say, oh, well, come and work. And they actually work more, because they actually like doing it. And once they get into doing it, and what they have to realize is they really do make a difference. So, whether it's volunteering at a food bank or at a community event or any of those things, it really does make a difference, and it connects you with people, and it connects you with people of all different scales, which is also important. So, just get involved, and I'm sure that I know for myself, and I'm sure for Rudy and Sven, we would encourage it and welcome it, and reach out to us, and we'd be happy to engage you in it, because I can't say enough how much of a difference it makes. And I encourage my kids, my two kids, to get involved as well, because I did all the way through, partly because I was, in a political family, but I learned those lessons through that. And a lot of my friends kind of came along with it and did those things too. And just such a wonderful experience that you have. And that's how you get into politics. And really the reason we're into politics is to make a difference, to make a positive difference. And that's the only reason that I do it. I care about my community. I care about the residents, and I want to make a difference. And it started from me getting involved when I was a kid. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I'll move it on to Rudy now. What advice would you have for youth who are wanting to get involved at the regional level or by getting into politics?
Well, I think that all children should get involved in some type of community work. Myself, I remember at the time, my parents were much older. Back then, my mother was 43 when she had me, and back then it was different than today, being at 43 having me. So I was always involved with older people in the community. I always used to go and volunteer at my grandfather's shoe repair, which was where the Vogue's movie theater was, where the Crooked Q is today. So I used to help him there, but I got involved in community work. I remember in high school, as well as cleaning up parks and doing things like that. And because you start hanging around older people and you listen to them, because the elders know a lot more than we do, as I did as a child, right? Because they've had the experience. And I think it's very important to get involved with your elders and with to become better people in your community, and then move into politics. I was always involved in politics growing up. I did signs for Margaret Marlin, Don Blencar, and these are many, many years ago, probably before your time. But I thought it was very important to do that. Sometimes I agreed or disagreed with certain things that they were doing, but at the end of the day, it's very good to get involved. I think like I have about 10 or 15 volunteers that come into my office on a weekly basis, even during COVID, that go out for me and do volunteer things for me. So I think it's very important, and you learn what you stand for at the end of the day, because sometimes they might be volunteering for me or for Sven, but they don't agree with what we stand for, and they learn that. And it's very important. So like at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what political party or whoever you volunteer for. I think it's very important to volunteer because it builds character in you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Lastly, Sven.
Thanks so much for that question. It's probably one of the most important questions of the evening. And there's a number of different ways to answer it. The first thing to say is that politics is everywhere. You don't necessarily have to get formally involved under the auspices of an elected official or through some structural program, even though there are many. The Prime Minister has a youth council. We have a youth council that's adjunct to our office. That's probably quite a bit more formal than many other forms of politics that people can get involved in. If you join an initiative to advocate for the ban of plastic bags, and you don't do anything more than that, you are involved in politics, right? Politics is about creating a better world, about creating just outcomes, better outcomes. And I think the resounding message is that you are, as a young person, not a leader of tomorrow, you are a leader of today. It doesn't matter if you're 10 years old, if you're looking at Greta Thunberg, who's in her mid-teens, or if you're in your early 20s and in university. Carve out your ground, find an issue, become involved. You can be an advocate publicly, you can work behind the scenes. I think the most important thing is to find that issue that makes you passionate, that sort of drives you to say, I'd like to get involved, I'd like to make a difference. We talked earlier about the diversity and inclusion agenda, about anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, gender equality. These are all really big, important issues. The one that's under-illuminated still, but quickly coming onto the scene is the youth agenda. Youth is part of diversity and inclusion. And if you look at local, all the way up to the United Nations, the youth voice now is louder than it ever has been. So there's a wide open door for people to connect with their peers, with their classmates, with their teachers, to develop projects, to either come up to their elected officials or finding a grassroots advocacy or civil society group that does some great work. And you can start as a volunteer. There's a great deal of flexibility. And as Rudy said, it gives you skills, experience, and it builds, it preps you for public life in many different ways.
Great, thank you. Those were all really great responses, from Matt, who focused on community and civic engagement, and then Rudy, who mentioned utilizing the experience that, elders have, and, youth obviously bring a fresh and newer perspective to things. And then for Sven, who said that, youth should feel empowered as the leaders of today. And as a youth myself, I would love to reach out to, all three of you and connect with you on an individual basis. But for the next question, this is for all the speakers as well, so we'll just follow the same method. What plans do you have to address the large carbon cost of food, transporting food, production of meat and dairy, and food waste? So we'll start with Matt.
So that's a tough question from a municipal politician. We don't really have that much input at our level of government to be able to necessarily address that or have an effect on it. I know the challenge with with the food, with the transportation. I think in general, it's an issue. I mean, we need to reduce those transportation emissions. And how do we do that? Again, from a municipal level, we're looking at more at, changing our fleets and our buses and our fleets within our, municipal fleets, our trucks and all of those things. So it's really a tough question for me with the limited resources that I have as a municipal councillor, as a municipal politician, to address that larger scale, although it's an extremely important issue. And I know that everybody does need to look at it. And that's really, addressing that in the larger picture is the only way that we're going to achieve those, those targets. So I don't want that to be a politician's non-answer. I'm just going to tell you that it's a difficult one for me because, again, I'm challenged with, with the resources and the limited ability, within the Municipal Act to deal with specifics like that. So that's my, I would say that's my non-answer, but I wish I had a better one.
Well, I guess it's the start of the conversation, so we'll move it on to Rudy now.
Thank you. Well, I would recommend that we produce more products, more like grains and food here in Ontario instead of having it transported from the US or from other parts of the other provinces, as well as more electric vehicles that we are looking at in the future, even transport trucks going electric probably in the near future, as well as hydro and hydroelectric vehicles, as well as more trains, instead of having the regular transport trucks on the road always, well, they're polluting, they're chewing up our roads, and they're causing accidents, unfortunately, as well. So that's what we would look at more in the future. But I think if we could continue producing more products here in Ontario, and, I'm going to go to the Premier. He always says, you look at the PPEs, we have to produce them here in Ontario. We don't want to be hostage to any other country ever again. And I agree with that, and producing things here in Ontario. I don't know if you noticed the other day, the Como Foundation from Mississauga Lakeshore, Sven knows them, probably Matt was there at the announcement too. They produced a see-through, sorry, do I have it here on my desk? Yes, I do. Sorry, it's a see-through mask for the hearing impaired, right? And it was produced here in Ontario, right in Mississauga Lakeshore. And the nice thing is they're donating $5 million to the Trillium Health Partners. So this is what we have to do, is produce more in Ontario. And I think we can do it as a population. We have the smartest minds here. We have, look at all three levels of government. We have very intelligent people in our governments, and we should all, work together and produce more in Ontario. And that's what we do to reduce transportation of products into Ontario.
Great, thank you. Lastly, on to Sven.
So this is a really important question. It's a very interesting question. If you look at food, you kind of have to say, okay, what's the overall carbon footprint of producing that food, right? So let's hypothetically say that fruit was produced in Florida entirely with sun energy and almost at a near zero carbon footprint, if not negative. It actually produces some oxygen in the growing process and can then be transported here on a net zero basis. Then theoretically, we wouldn't care where it is produced, right? So we have to look at the overall carbon footprint. If it's produced here with great intensity of light and energy resources, because we're far north and we have to illuminate it artificially, it may have a much bigger carbon footprint than something in Florida, even though it's only being moved 50 kilometers to downtown Toronto. There's a cool story from our writing. Like this question really is a global question, because up to 40%, depending on where you are, of food is actually wasted between harvest and consumption. And one area where that's particularly true is in West Africa, right? So West Africa is struggling in large part because of wasted food. There is a plastics manufacturer in our writing by the name of Chandler Packages. They produce a specialty plastic wrap that's ethylene that takes some of the gases out of the air that slows down the ripening of fruit. As a result, a food manufacturer in West Africa using this technology could, for example, extend the radius of her food in a relatively carbon neutral way and ship it to other markets so it's not wasted. Right. So really, the short answer to that question is we need to have private sector energies to tap into the innovation. If we legislate net zero by 2050, our business world knows that we're going to backstop them, that we're going to invest in these creative questions and solutions, and looking at the entire footprint of food production and food waste, figuring out how we can be most effective in making sure that things are not wasted, all the way up to including very concrete steps that Rudy's very engaged in, making sure that food doesn't get thrown out if it can be, for example, put to the safe and effective use of a local food bank.
Awesome. Thank you to everyone for all your answers. So the next question I have is specifically for Rudy. And the question asks, why is the province pushing forward on highway projects, including the proposed Highway 413, which lock in GHG emissions, ignore environmental and agricultural concerns, and cause deforestation?
Why we are continuing building these projects is because they're already, first of all, they are in the pipeline, but we do have vehicles still. People are still using the vehicle. And until we can get people out of the vehicle, we're going to have to continue doing these projects. So we have to work with our manufacturers here so we can get people, or not our manufacturers, with our transit systems to build more transit and making the province and the country more green, environmentally friendly. But we still have to build these highways because we are still transporting products on these highways. So we have to continue doing that. Otherwise, we'd be in a gridlock until we produce other things. So we have to continue with these projects at this present time.
Great, thank you. And so we have our final question now, and this is again for all the speakers. So we'll follow the same method of, Matt, Rudy, Sven. So the question asks, you each brought up the importance of race, gender, equity, equality. What are you doing to ensure that people are not only part of the consultation process, but they are also brought into the leadership positions with these projects? So we'll start with Matt.
Well, it's a great question and a great point. And, somebody who was born and raised in Mississauga, one of the things that I'm most proud of is how diverse we are as a community, for starters, and how we all work together. It's a matter of working together. And I know that sounds, like a big picture thing, but I think, as communities, and again, I'm very community based, but we need to work together. We need to understand, we need to participate in each other's, learning and those types of things, and really listen. That's one thing that a lot of people have trouble doing, is listening and understanding, what the challenges are for the inequities and for the race. So it's a matter of, like I say, working together and listening and being partners in all of this. And it's not all about government. It's about community and bringing people together. And I think that's what we need to do. Very proud of Mississauga as a whole, of the city that we are, and the city we become, and the diverse city that we are, and probably one of the most diverse cities in the country. And we are a great example of how diversity works, and diversity is our strength, which is a term that we use often. So really just working together, learning and participating with each other is the way to go. Really.
Great, thank you. On to Rudy now.
Yeah. Well, if you look at our party, look at our 73 MPPs that are at Queen's Park. If you look how diverse we are, we have the first Muslim PC MPP, Khalid Rashid. We have, I can't remember how many women we have, but we have one of the most women caucus that we've ever had. As well, we have the most millennium in caucus. Like, this is unbelievable. This is what's been done in Ontario over the last 2 years in our government. So we as a government we're on the right track doing what we're doing to get more people involved in our government and across the province of Ontario. So I think we are on track, but we got to continue working on this. This is not easy. We know that. And like, even my office, I have every cultural background I can have in my office. I think that's a great thing, because we live in a multicultural province and country. So I think it's very important to have everybody working together for the goal of making this country a better country.
Awesome, thank you. And lastly, Sven, for the last question.
Thanks so much, Tavia. The diversity and inclusion agenda is one that has to be present everywhere. It has to be a diversity and inclusion lens with everything that we're doing. And I think in large part that's becoming a reality. And it's a privilege. And I think Matt and Rudy will agree to serve in a community where there's already so much leadership. We have so many councils, so many action groups, so many young people, so many seniors who are very vocal, very engaged in issues. All we have to do well as elected officials is to listen carefully and then to tap into these energies. It's very easy and very gratifying to work with such an extraordinary group of leaders. We've built some councils here at the federal level. We've built a seniors council in Mississauga Lakeshore. We've built a council of youth, as I said, that was mandated by the Prime Minister, but it's become an extraordinary vehicle for advocacy and action. We've built a faith leaders dialogue in the aftermath of the Quebec mosque shooting a number of years ago, and we're also very closely connected to leaders of our Black community on the questions of systemic anti-Black racism that pervades some organizations and institutions here in Peel Region. And it's a question of listening to understanding fully what they would like to do, and then to actually showcasing that leadership, supporting that leadership be it by supporting applications of particular leaders for positions, be it by supporting and advocating for their projects, or connecting them to each other through conversations. And it could be a young person who has never done anything before, takes their first project, walks into a room, and jaws just drop, at the level of passion and the level of engagement, and then taking that young person and making introductions and connections. We've brought folks up to Ottawa to testify on parliamentary committees. That's a very formal aspect of promoting leadership, but we've also put folks into our householders and said, great job. And as a result of that, the next idea was catalyzed. So it's a natural thing. Like Matt and Rudy have said, it's a real privilege to serve in a community in which there's already so much leadership. And just my thanks to everybody for this important work that they're already doing.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you for your responses. So we do have a little bit of more time left for the allocated question and answer period. So if you're up for one more question, especially Sven, I think this might be of interest to you because it's about nuclear energy. So I'll just direct it, and then Rudy and Matt can chime in. So we'll start with Sven for this one. The question is, what happens to nuclear waste when we talk about nuclear energy?
Right. So this is the big question, and you'll see a number of countries that are struggling with this very acutely at the moment. Germany and Canada, of course, as well. Nuclear waste has to be stored safely, and there's questions about deep geological depositories, basically just drilling really deep holes into the ground and having them swallow the waste up. And in some ways, even that can be done very safely with the right scientific and geographic consultation. Of course, it's not ideal because it is highly radioactive waste, and if not done correctly, could create enormous damage. But that's part of the industry, is the use or the recycling potentially and depositing of nuclear waste. There are some technologies that Rudy mentioned that are coming online. There are nuclear technologies that could ingest more of the waste. So in other words, you would take the waste product that otherwise would have to go into a repository, feed it into a different kind of reactor, and it'll break it down further and reduce the half-life. That's not cheap. It's not been tested in every jurisdiction, but with the right science behind it, could potentially also be done safely. There are nuclear enthusiasts, there are nuclear critics, there are people that are neutral on the question, but it is a resource, and it's a resource in which Canada is deeply steeped through the CANDU reactor model that has been exported into many parts of the world. There is science, technology, expertise behind it. And I think it's worthwhile to have that conversation because as was pointed out, that it is a clean energy source, even though we should be very mindful of the fact that it is a transitional energy source. So if the entire planet went nuclear tomorrow, we may have 100 or 200 years of that resource left, depending on how intensely we use it. But ultimately there too, we have to transition into completely renewables because we're going to run out of uranium. So it's a good question. I'm glad it was raised, and I think the discussion should continue.
Great, thank you. And Rudy, if you'd like to chime in on that discussion.
I don't know how we do.
That was to be honest, Sven, that was a great answer. You really hit it on the nose on every aspect. When I was first elected, I went to the CANDU plant myself to look at how nuclear was done. And I was very shocked that it's a very small location if you really think about all the energy, all the electricity that's being produced from this plant, and how they dispose of the I forget what they're called now. What are the cylinders called? I forget what but how they dispose of them and they put them in water, and they have to sit there for over 100 years before. But I think right now it's the most efficient way to produce electricity for the province of Ontario. And I think, until we find something else or move to something else, I think we should continue with nuclear over coal, because coal is very dirty. So right now, I think nuclear is the way to be. Like I said, in Ontario, it's been very safe. We haven't had any issues in Ontario. There's been very, very well-paying jobs that we have here in Mississauga. We have, what is it called? Hatch, that does a lot of our nuclear work, and I've spoken to them and they claim it's very safe, and I believe it is very safe because I've worked in different manufacturers in Ontario, and I find that the nuclear industry is very safe here in Ontario.
Great, thank you. And lastly, Matt.
I'm not sure I can add to that. I do want to say, you know, you're never too old to learn. I appreciate Sven's insight on that and some of the knowledge, and as well to Rudy. You know, it's great. It's again, you know, not something at a municipal level that we necessarily deal with, but it's extremely important. And I think both Sven and Rudy, you know, have addressed it and made some very good points. So you know, I appreciate their you know, their input on that, and really don't have anything else to add to it. But and I do know that we're coming to an end, and I'm not sure if we're able to just kind of say a thank you to you as we, you know, kind of wind down. But I do really appreciate, you know, putting this together. It's you know, as I've said before, it's you know, it's just so important to you know, to be able to reach out and to have people reach out to us and ask questions, you know, of interest to them. And having the perspective of all three levels of government is also very important. I think most of the you know, the people who did ask the questions understand that, you know, the different responsibilities and levels of, you know, municipal, provincial, and federal. But I think us in Mississauga, you know, we don't necessarily, we work together. I'll say, you know, maybe we all come from different political stripes, or we all come from, you know, different backgrounds. But at the end of the day, we all pull together to, you know, in the best interest of the city of Mississauga, and you know, as well as the province and the country, you know, because we all have interest there. So, but again, hearing from the people is something that that I enjoy. It's probably one of the most rewarding parts of my job, whether it's a grade 3 class, a grade 8 class, or meeting with a senior at South Common Community Center. I find that so valuable to be able to receive their input. And this is a great example with, you know, with the topic of environment, which obviously the three of us and everybody here involved in this call are so passionate about. So this is a conversation that, you know, I like to say has only just begun, although it seems like we've been talking about the environment for a long time. But I think, you know, all of us pulling together and achieving the goals that we've set, some of them are high, but I know we can achieve them with all of us working together. So I did just want to take this opportunity, Carol, and to everybody, to thank you for putting this together, and thank you for inviting me to participate, and thank you for those on the YouTube channel who tuned in. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. I want to thank Divya and all the attendees for their great questions. And we didn't actually get through all of them, so I encourage the attendees who didn't get their questions asked to reach out to Matt, Rudy, and Sven and see if they'll answer them by email. I do want to thank our panelists, Matt Mahoney, Rudy Cazzetto, and Sven Spengeman, for a really interesting and important discussion. I also want to thank the planning team and the tech team that are facilitating the YouTube live stream. And I want to encourage any of the attendees who are interested in local climate action to reach out to any of the organizations that were involved in planning this event and get more involved. We'll have a slide at the end showing websites and social media handles and so forth. And I really hope, attendees, that this town hall has inspired you to keep on engaging with your political representative on climate issues that are important to you. We need to show there's continued political will for a green and just recovery. So thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you, everybody.